Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today is May the 2nd, 2020, and we're finishing week 7 of our shelter in place here in Ontario. Um, our Premier has indicated that there's some businesses will be starting up slowly to be reopening soon, so I hope that everyone is safe and healthy. And a big, huge shout out again to all the healthcare workers and all the other critical service workers like the delivery and food services. So we're in our virtual classes for those who are joining for the first time. Really, um, we'll be using Slido. So if you have your mobile phones ready, we'll be jumping into Slido to do an online survey. And of course, you can always have some questions and feedback on the comment side of YouTube, um, and as well as through email. So here we are in week 5 of a 6-week series. Last week we saw how God tore down and rebuilt and reforming the church. And this week we will look at the very complicated relationship between Islam and Christianity. And next week the class format will be actually very different. Next week we'll be having a virtual panel, bringing in Christians from around the world for a discussion here on missions and our role in it. We'll be chatting with our Christian brothers and sisters um, from Toronto, from Niger, from France, and Cambodia. So should be very exciting for next week. So for those who have your mobile phone, you can jump over to Slido, and what I'll do is I'll start up the Slido poll, and the event code is your mission 5. So just let me slide over here. All right, just give me a second here, and I'll activate the poll. And the poll question today is very, very simple. Do you personally know either a friend or a coworker or perhaps a relative, someone who's a practicing Muslim? And the answers are very simple, yes or no. So just opening up the poll for people to answer. If you can get onto slido.com and type in the poll code, your mission 5, and it's yes or no. So I'll give people a few minutes to answer the question on the Slido. So we're seeing that pretty much everybody, 100%, is indicating yes, they do know somebody who's a practicing Muslim. And you know what? I'm actually, I'd be surprised if there were any responses that indicated that they didn't personally know someone who was a practicing Muslim. Now, we flipped the question around. There is somebody who answered no. We flipped the question around. So for the people that answered yes, so out of the questions, so out of the Muslims that are in your life, so you think about the Muslim, either a friend, coworker, relative in your life, how many of your Muslim friends, whether they be coworkers, relatives, or friend, know that you are a practicing Christian? And the question goes a little bit deeper is why is it that we know that they are practicing Muslims, but for some reason they don't know that we are practicing Christians? I find that the flip question actually quite interesting. So let me get out of here, and we'll flip over to PowerPoint. So thank you for those who participated in the poll. Our our devotion today is taken from Genesis, Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3. And this is the call of Abram. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And there's a couple things here to observe, really. First thing is Abram moves to a new land. I mean, this is where he just packs up his household, his wife and his family, and all that he owns, and he just picks up and goes to a different place wherever God showed him. And that was taken in verse 8, which we didn't read. The second thing we did notice is that God blesses Abram as a great nation or a people group. So a nation can be translated as a people group. So God blesses Abram. The third thing is that God would curse those who dishonor Abram. So this relationship between God and Abram is very close. And if you know, one of a very, very tight relationship. And the fourth thing that I've noticed here is that all families of the earth shall be blessed through him, which is a very interesting an interesting phrase here, because at this point in life, Abram actually has no children, and so really, without any people taking your family name, it's kind of odd that God would make this promise, or this promise to Abram. Where exactly was Abram at the time? Well, what we see was Abram had moved into where God was showing him, into this land in this area called Shechem and Bethel. And it's that sort of general vicinity. So really, it's somewhere between Shechem, Bethel, and Ai. Those are the cities there. Where is it located in today's time? That area is actually located in what's called the West Bank in Israel, current modern day Israel. And we find in Genesis 15, 18 to 21, God's covenant with Abram promises to him this and his descendants huge swaths of land. So it's much bigger than that's indicated in that red circle. But I just wanted to give you a sense of where Abram moved to at that time. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is a YouTube video. And we pick up the story of Abram and Sarah in Genesis chapter 16. And this particular video production was actually produced by a Jewish organization. So you'll hear some of this in Hebrew, but there don't worry, there's subtitles. So I'm just gonna flip over.
Ram lo yalda. It had been years and they had not had children. Sarai did not give Abram children, and that's a real dilemma for anyone, but certainly back in the day, wasn't it?
It had actually been 10 years, and Sarah was now feeling like blame. She said, "The Lord has shut up my womb." So she was in quite a consternation. And so she turns and offers Abram her maidservant, and she says, "Here, take my maidservant."
Mhm.
In our day, we couldn't think of doing that with our husband, but it's kind of like you would a surrogate. And in the days, in the culture of that day, there was a Syrian law
Yeah.
that they could actually, if they hadn't had a child within 2 years,
Yes.
they could give their maidservant to their husband.
And isn't a maidservant closer in and more of an intimate relationship
Yeah.
with the mistress?
Yeah, well, I think that even there might have even been a really sweet relationship between Hagar and Sarai. You know, they had acquired Hagar in Egypt when they went down, and it seemed to me that there was a working relationship, a very fond relationship for
Yeah.
her to even offer her maidservant to
It
Abraham.
started that way, but it became very contentious, as one might imagine.
Right.
When Hagar conceived, that became a reproach for Sarai, and they have words with each other. In fact, Sarai has real strong sayings towards Abram, doesn't
Well,
she?
once she conceives, Hagar despises her mistress.
Wow.
So I can see her, you know, here I am, my belly's full, and look at you. There's nothing that you have to offer Abram. I am now superior. So now we're in this conflict. Sarah's made a mess, and so she goes to Abraham and say, "You fix it.
Right.
You
Right.
you succumb to my words, and now you fix it."
It really is a picture for us of not waiting on God's promise, but rushing ahead and trying to fulfill something in the natural way, in a biological way that God is wanting to do supernaturally. And so between them, they create this alternative, which is Ishmael. Now, this is a touchy subject because Ishmael will also be blessed by God as a son of Abram. But what it does set up is this contention between the son of promise, Isaac, and the son of the natural life, Ishmael, which will have incredible repercussions over the centuries and even into our day. We're living with the repercussions of that choice. And one thing that happens is the depersonalizing that we see in the words that Abram and Sarai use regarding Hagar. In order to get through this dilemma, they start saying that handmaid, your handmaid, she, her, and they really take away the name and take away the personal relationships in order to distance themselves from her. And I think that's what happens whenever there's oppression, whenever there's a group that's singled out. The first thing that takes place is a depersonalizing, and that's really what's happening here, is that Sarai and Abram are trying to find their way through this, and in order to find their way through, they have to distance themselves from the effect of their own choices.
You know, no matter what we do, if we fall or if we stumble, if we turn to the Lord, He can make it right. He can work it together for good.
Right, and we're going to see that in the upcoming story, how God is going to take all of this seeming mess and dysfunction and use it for good for Abraham, the father of faith.
So you see in this story here, where Abram, and you can read the story from the Bible through chapter 16 of Genesis. You see how God had promised Abram many descendants, and yet Sarah and Abram never. They believed God, but they thought that maybe they can help God along. Maybe they can help God along, and they didn't want to wait too much longer. And so Sarah conceived of this idea of having her handmaiden, Hagar, sleep with Abram and produce an offspring. And this offspring is Ishmael. And Ishmael and Hagar is actually blessed by God afterwards, despite this wasn't God's original intent. Let's jump back to our PowerPoint. So what happens here is that because God promised to care for Hagar and Ishmael, their descendants grew numerous as well as the descendants of Abraham and Sarah. So you see here on the family diagram, Abraham later on has the promised child from God through his first wife, Sarah, who is Isaac. And the first son that Abraham has is with Hagar, the handmaiden, who is Ishmael. Now, the descendants of Ishmael really becomes really all of the Arab nations that we see today. Whereas the descendants of Isaac is really the descendants of Sarah and Isaac are really the Jewish nation. And now we see that God has a plan to bless Abraham, but the lack of patience, or is that the lack of faith, has led to the conflicts that we see even to this day. So this slide here, just probably pop the slide only. This slide here is really showing a demographic breakdown of all the religions in the world. And you see that the Christians, and that's including the Orthodox, that's including the Catholic, and that's including the Protestants. The Christians number about 31% of the world. And now we have as well Muslims averaging about 24% of the world, about 1/4 of the world's population. So what is Islam? Islam really just means surrender or submission. And a Muslim is somebody who practices Islam, the religion Islam. And a Muslim is one who surrenders to God. Now, the word God in Arabic is Allah. So when your Muslim friend or your Muslim coworker is talking about Allah, he or she is just speaking about God. And God is in the Islamic faith. God is one and only, the one and only deity in all of existence. So strictly monotheistic. So very, very confidently indicating that there is only one God, and that God is supreme, all-knowing, and ever-present, and God has created the universe in 6 days. How did the Prophet Muhammad receive the Quran? Well, the Quran is the sacred book of Islam. It's divided into about 114 chapters. They call surahs. And the Quran is the direct, literal word of God, as the Muslims believe, and delivered by the angel Gabriel. So the Muslims do believe in the Old Testament and the New Testament of the Bible, but they also believe that the Quran supersedes the Old Testament and the New Testament. So if there's any conflict or any deviations, the Quran has the higher authority. So they believe the prophets, such as Noah, such as Abraham, such as Moses, David, and even Jesus is considered a prophet for the Muslims. But Muhammad is the greatest of all of Allah's prophets. All right, so we're going to watch a second video. And this is going to give a sort of a short origin of Islam.
So, travel back in time with me to a land far, far away and long, long ago. Mecca and Arabia, about the year 570. Mecca is important for two reasons. 1. The Kaaba is there, an ancient temple built to worship God. And 2. Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born in Mecca. Now, problem. I can't show you Muhammad because it wouldn't be right. I'll tell you why in a bit. But in the meantime, here's his name in Arabic. Nice. Back in the day, Mecca was a lawless place. The only way to be safe was to have backup. Lots of rich big brothers who'd beat up anyone who got in your way. So the place was ruled by the most powerful families who could do pretty much what they wanted. And religion didn't help. By this time, the Kaaba had been filled to overflowing with 360 idols that did nothing to help anyone. So it was a tough place to grow up if, like Muhammad, you were a poor orphan and believed in just one God you couldn't see, like the Jews and the Christians. He called him Allah, the God, in Arabic there. Muhammad's dad died before he was even born, and his mum died when he was just 6. So he was brought up by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, and then, when he died too, by his uncle, Abu Talib, who had the respect of the city's ruling families, so Muhammad was safe for the time being. Muhammad started out as a shepherd and then became a businessman, travelling about buying and selling stuff for rich clients. When he did some work for a rich widow called Khadija, she was so impressed by his honesty and skill that they ended up getting married, and for a while, it looked like Muhammad was going places. Well, he was, but not how you think. Every year in the month of Ramadan, different calendar, different names for the months, there was a big party around the Kaaba when people made sacrifices to the idols. Muhammad hated it, so he'd get out of town and sleep in a cave he'd found on top of a nearby mountain. One night, Muhammad's praying to Allah when wham! There's the angel Jibreel, you might say Gabriel, standing right in front of him. Read, says the angel, but Muhammad couldn't read. No schools, you see. Jibreel keeps on at him. 3 times he says, read. Then he grabs hold of Muhammad and wham! Again, it's like Muhammad's learnt the words off by heart. So he recites the message out loud. Read in the name of your Lord, who created man from a drop of blood. Read, for your Lord is most generous. He who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know. It was a message from Allah. God was speaking to him just like he'd spoken to the prophets in the Jewish and Christian holy books, which meant he was a prophet too. The messages continued for the rest of Muhammad's life. Allah gave him the words to say and the prophet recited them. The words were written down by his friends, and years later they were collected together and became the Muslim holy book, the Quran, which means recitation, because Muhammad recited it, you see? Anyway, that was much later, so back to the night of power. Muhammad tells his family, then his friends, and eventually everyone about Allah, that he's the one and only God, that he wants everyone to be treated fairly, and long story short, it didn't go down well with the ruling families of Mecca, who liked things just the way they were, thank you very much. You see, Islam means obedience to Allah, and Muslim means someone who obeys Allah, and the ruling families didn't want anyone obeying anyone else but them.
So for those of you who are wondering about that cube, and you may have seen the pictures of that cube in Mecca during the pilgrimages, at the time of an annual time where Muslims are supposed to make a trip back to Mecca to visit this cube. It's a holy shrine, a holy place. And inside the cube is actually just, it's just a meteorite. It's a meteorite that fell from space, and they built this whole temple or this shrine, this cube, around this meteorite. And so, and this is a very important part of the Muslim faith. So we can't talk about Islam without making mention of the split between sort of two of the larger sects within Islam. So one is called Sunni. So you have Sunni Muslims, and the other is Shia. So you have Shia Muslims. In the real question was the how and why. So last week we talked about Reformation. We talked about the reason why Protestants broke away from the Catholics. Well, the Sunnis and Shias has a much simpler reason of why they split or separated, and it occurred, I mean, almost right away after Muhammad received the Quran. When Muhammad the prophet passed away, there was a group of people that believed that the leadership of the Islamic faith should be chosen by the people. But there was a second group of people, the Shias, who believed that the leadership of Islam should be a direct descendant of Muhammad. And so really the differences, the split, the reason of the split was very much a political decision. It was a in some sense you can call it a power struggle. What are some of the differences in the practices theology-wise? The primary difference in practice comes in that the Sunni Muslims mainly rely on the Sunnah, the record of the teachings and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, to guide their actions, while the Shiites more heavily rely on their ayatollahs, their religious leaders, whom they see as a sign of God on earth. So, when you're talking about Islam, you're talking about the five important pillars of Islam. The first pillar is the pillar of faith. There is no true God except Allah, and Muhammad is the true prophet, and that's drilled in from day one. So that's these are non-negotiable beliefs. The second one is prayer. They believe that prayer is absolute and a requirement for every single practicing believer. They pray 5 times a day. So before sunrise, mid-morning, afternoon, sunset, and evening. So I think that's 5. So they pray 5 times a day. And they also, when they do pray, they pray in a specific direction. They pray in the direction towards Mecca. So depending on where you are in the world, that would be oriented different direction, but it's always pointing towards Mecca. Mecca is their holy city. They practice fasting on a regular basis. In fact, we're in the time of Ramadan right now, which is their period of fasting from sunrise to sunset. So no water, no food from sunrise to sunset. And they have a little bit to eat before, and they have a little bit to eat after, before sunrise and after sunset. But nothing during the day. During the day, so not even water. They practice offering. And of course the pilgrimage, the Hajj, to Mecca, to go visit Mecca. Some would say that there is a sixth pillar, which is I wouldn't say as strictly held, where the sixth pillar would be the jihad, which is the holy war. Now it's translated as holy war. But really, more specifically, it should be more technically and correctly translated as a striving or a struggle in the way of God. And most would interpret that as a spiritual struggle as opposed to something that's physical. But it could be physical as well, as a physical struggle. So I love maps, and you've seen many maps that I've shown. This is a map that I found, which shows in the world different countries and how they have reported, the people that reported to this survey, um, who say that they pray daily. Okay, so the question is, do you pray daily? And it doesn't matter which religion you adhere to. So whether you're Muslim or Christian, or whatever faith you would subscribe to. So the question is, do you pray on a daily basis? And it's very interesting to note here that some of the countries that are very high in people that pray, in terms of percentage of people that pray, can be found in Africa, in the Middle East, and in India, and Southeast Asia, in Indonesia. So those are the very high praying countries, shall we say. It's also interesting to note that that the highest praying country in this survey is Nigeria. So if, for those who can't see the words here, Nigeria is located sort of in sort of the central west part of Africa. It reports as the highest percentage of the population who prays daily, at 95%. So 95% of the population of Nigeria pray on a daily basis. And so I did a little bit of looking up, and it's very interesting about the religious split in Nigeria. The religious split of the country is roughly about 50% Muslim and 50% Christian. And I find that just fascinating that not because it's 50-50, but that I find it fascinating that 95% of that population of that country prays on a daily basis. Now, let's take a look at these quote unquote Christian countries, and I point out the Christian country, the so-called Christian country of Canada, U.S., UK, Germany, Russia, and Australia. So if you remember, the Orthodox Church is now really the Russian Orthodox Church. 18% of the people in Russia are reporting that they do pray on a regular basis, on a daily basis. Canada is reporting about 25% of the population that prays on a daily basis. I'll just leave these stats for you to sort of ponder on, whereas you can compare to, let's say, a country that's almost entirely Muslim, such as Iran, or perhaps Indonesia, where they have incredibly high percentages of the population that pray on a regular basis, on a daily basis. So we'll get to the questions. We're getting to the questions of the day. So I'll leave you with 3 questions. Question number 1, in God's plan, sometimes we have to wait. So for example, Abraham and Sarah, after God had promised to them that their descendants would be numerous as the stars, they needed to wait. Well, my question to you is, how difficult is it to wait? Or do we sometimes take action on our own, hoping to help God along? Question number 2, as each Christian is saved by grace, have we forgotten the acts of obedience to God, such as prayer and devotion, etc.? Question number 3, have you engaged in spiritual discussions with Muslims in your life? And I find that very interesting, because if you have, you'll find that Muslims are incredibly spiritual, and they're always willing to talk about Allah. They're always willing to talk about God. So it's an interesting question. I'm interested to hear from others if you've ever discussed or engaged in spiritual discussions with your Muslim friend or colleague or perhaps relative. So finally, to everyone, thank you for spending some time here. I'll flip back to the questions slide. If you can think about these questions and perhaps let me know your reactions via the comment section on the YouTube live stream or email, that's fine. That's great. I'll leave the live stream on and participate via the chat until about 8 p.m. And of course, you can always send me an email afterwards with your comments and questions. We'll have our next class next Saturday, same place, same time. But it will be a virtual panel discussion from around the world. So hope you can make it. May 9th, 2020 at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I wish you all health and peace, and God bless.